Well, thanks so much, everyone, for joining. Let's get started. Welcome to the Growth Lab Developments Talks. My name is Lucas Lambie. I'm a research fellow at the Growth Lab. And the Growth Lab Development Talks are a series of conversations with policymakers, academics, working on economic growth and development in countries, regions, states, and cities in the US and across the world. The seminar really provides a platform for practitioners and researchers to discuss both economic growth, development, and analytical work centered on policy. And today it's my great pleasure to welcome Osmel Manzano. Osmel is a regional economic advisor for the country department for the Andean Group at the Inter-American Development Bank. He's also an adjunct professor at the Walsh School of Foreign Service at Georgetown University and the Elliott School of International Affairs at George Washington University. He's taught courses on macroeconomics, public finance, energy economics, and oil economics. And he's been working on development challenges in Latin America with emphasis on resource abundance, agriculture, energy, growth, and productivity, and has authored numerous publications on these subjects. Today, Osmel and we together will discuss the key challenges and opportunities for effective natural resource management in Latin America and its implications for economic development and productive diversification, highlighting the role of local dynamics specifically. So we'll start with a brief presentation from Osmel, some questions from my side, and then we'll open up to the audience for Q&A. So if you're online for the webinar, please drop your questions in the chat, and we'll make sure to gather them and address them as well. And with that, please join me in welcoming Osmel.
Thank you, Lucas. I would like to start by thanking the Growth Lab, the Kennedy School for the invitation, Ricardo Hausman, a good friend. And today, I wanted to focus what we're going to present today is a little bit of the state of where we are in an agenda that we have been developing at the Inter-American Development Bank on the role of natural resources and development. This is a joint work with my colleague Daniela Valdivia, and this has been done. It's a little bit to take a little bit stock on what we have done so far. It's not the end of the agenda. We'll talk a little bit at the end of where we are, no? But you know, one of the issues is that in Latin America, we tend to associate natural resources with the macro, no? And we have a lot of knowledge on the macro, no? And not because Ricardo is here, but one of the first papers of stabilization funds was written by Ricardo Roberto Rigobo a long time ago. So we have all this idea about the macro. But it turns out that in Latin America also, natural resources are associated with conflict and a lot of local issues, no? And there has been less work on what is driving these local issues that sometimes when we think about the opportunities, so yes, today we are in this, whatever you want to call it, energy transition or energy improvement in efficiency and productivity, that requires a lot of minerals, no? And therefore they say, oh, this is an opportunity. But one key issue is access. And sometimes access may not be necessarily that you have the right legal framework, is that you also have the buy-in of the local people to have access to resources, no? So that's the agenda for today. I'm going to go quickly. I know that Lucas was scared when he saw so many slides, but I'm not going to go straight to the message, no? So we have to remember that in Latin America, this is for the Andean region, for example, how important are natural resources as a share of GDP. So we have a tradition of relying a lot on natural resources, right? And then, of course, we have a new opportunity, no? Again, with this energy transition, there are going to be a lot of mineral resources. We're demand for mineral resources in the region. We have lithium, we have copper, we have some rare earths. So this is another opportunity. But we know that also we have a lot of bad experience in the past of boom and bust of some commodities. We know what was the guano era in Peru a long time ago, the Amazon rubber boom, and what happened after the boom. And even we have all the we have the commodity price shocks in the 80s, or for those of you even go outside this, coffee. We know the boom and bust of coffee, and some people even think that some of the migration that we see from Central America began with the crash of coffee prices in the 90s. So we have this history of boom and bust, and missed opportunities about natural resources in Latin America. So the key issue is, what do we know about how this sector interacts with the economy? And the traditional view, the view that we have in the 50s and 60s, was that these are enclaves, So therefore, you have this enclave sector, right? So your goal is to maximize the rent that you take out of the sector, and with that, then invest in other stuff, But what we are missing is that there are huge impacts, of mining in local impact. So we have been doing a lot of work on this area, So for example, we found that Fruta del Norte is a project of mining in Ecuador, and when you look, for example, when the mine opened, there was a boom in the area, but by mine, I don't mean public jobs. It's that new enterprise. We went to the registry and new enterprise was created. Employment was created. Profits increased, And the same, we just did a work for the Colchaca community in Bolivia when the mine of San Cristobal was open, and also you find huge local impacts, and it's not only economics, This is a work that we just did for Peru. And there is also the social impact, and this is quickly because here I'm presenting like the big picture, but this is an example of also how policies that we do affect the outcome. So in Peru, there is the canon. The canon goes to the local governments, and we know that there is some impact of canon, of local revenue, on education. But it turns out that in 2011 there was a reform. And because of that reform, and we can discuss the specifics of the reform if you want later, some municipalities, some districts lose revenue. And we found that their education performance went down. So that's what you see there with the lines, the silver line. They begin to have lower scores than other municipalities, other districts in Peru because of the reform. So therefore, there are these local effects that we don't know. Then we do these reforms, and then those reforms may have impacts that we are not seeing, and then you have the local communities being affected, and even beyond that, for example, when we look at poverty, you see here also, this is Peru also, how in mining districts poverty has reduced a lot compared to other non-mining districts. So the point at the end is that mining and oil have huge impacts at the local level. These impacts are not only income, they have to do also with education, health, and any other services, And communities do value those impacts. Of course, there are negative impacts on the health, on the environmental side, and therefore there are trade-offs, and I keep in mind this when I'm going to discuss this later, So we always associate mining on oil and gas with this negative environmental impact, but we leave aside all the positive impacts that has to do with economic activity, revenue, and things like that, And there, one of the things is how we have thought about institutions for local resource, for institutions to take revenue from the sector, and then how do we distribute them, So in general, we have, I'm not going to this, but this is my previous life in natural resources, like 10 years ago. The region has really complex taxation system for natural resources that, you have royalty, income tax, windfall tax. So we have a huge thing of that. Then we take those different instruments and then we design very complex distribution systems, And the principle in general is to redistribute, to give more to those that are not lucky to have natural resources and things like that. But what we have found is that at the end, you still generate a lot of inequality in how you distribute those rents. So your equality principle does not necessarily is being fulfilled by your redistribution policies that you do. And on top of that, you leave a lot of volatility. So these local governments at the end have to deal with a lot of volatility on the revenues and how they plan to do it, So So again, we have, as I mentioned, really highly important local impacts. Then you have fiscal systems that try to do some redistribution in a not necessarily a very good way. And on top of that, we also have been doing a lot of effort on transparency, like the EHTI and things like that, no? But what we're finding out is that citizens do not engage on those transparency. So we do this huge effort. So for example, I have a good friend that we edited a journal about the local resource course, no? And a journal, a special issue. And one of the things, he has the IP address of all the people that goes to Mapa Regalia, which in Colombia is kind of the transparency mechanism where you can see if the school that is in your backyard is, no. It turns out that like 90% of the consultation are done from Bogota, so not only the regions. So we invest in these platforms, no, but it turns out that these platforms do not show the citizen, the citizen that is really a beneficiary, that they are beneficiary, no? So we have this institutional setting, no, that doesn't necessarily translate into benefits for the citizen, no? So that's why we begin to do this idea of social license to operate, no? And we begin asking people, I don't want to go over the details, but in social license, there are like 4 components, no? One is governance, no? Whether you trust the government. And then the other component is what is called distributive justice, is that if you think that you receive a fair share, and the other one is called, I don't know why in the literature, is procedural justice. And procedural justice is whether firms are, you trust firms, no? So in the interesting thing is that when you ask a citizen of a Latin American country, is mining or oil good for your country, more than 15% of the people will say yes. They do believe oil or mining is good. So that's why we say there is an implicit social license. People do want to have oil. People do want to have mining. What happens is that people, for example, feel that they don't get a fair share. No? So when you ask, do you think that you're getting a fair share? No. Another question is, do you think that firms listen to you? No. But the most surprising things for us in this paper is that the question is, do you think that your government is good at setting up rules and enforcing those rules in the statistics? They say yes. No? So the main driver for people saying oil and gas, oil or mining is good is because they trust the government. No? So we have this kind of interesting perception that people say governments can effectively govern the sector. Well, the problem is not that. The problem is that I'm not getting a fair share, or I'm not getting, or firms do not understand me, no? And here, and that's why I say this is the beginning of the argument that I want to make, is that when you think fair share, we maybe all of us have this perception, no, of that, no, fair share is redistribution, no? No. We did an experiment, because we have 50 million, I'm not going to go to all the details of the experiment, but we did this experiment to reveal preference, no? And the whole point was to see if people would like to live in a system where all the revenues of the resource sector go to the district that produced the resource, or should be redistributed to others. And overwhelmingly, the preference it was that they want the revenue to go mostly to the producing districts, no? Especially to compensate any environmental damage that is on the district. Even more, we actually, that's the difference, it's a technicality, but it's interesting. We also, when we did this experiment, we eventually tie it to a payment that the participant of the experiment will get, no? That we told them, depending on what you said, you were going to get an outcome, no? And depending on that outcome, you will receive, and even more people bet that they rather be in a country that pass their revenue to the producing district than a country that redistributes revenue. So, and I think this is an important perception because all the Latin American tax systems are designed to redistribute, not to compensate regions that produce natural resources. No? So that's one of our arguments to say that we have a mismatch in the institutional setting that we have today and part of the conflict that we have today. No? So at the end, then we went to this about public sentiment and what people think about the resource, no? And I think that, and that, remember I told you about trade-off, is that it's really interesting because we ask, again, the same question that we asked before, no? Do you think that natural, and they say, why, no? And then we ask AI to interpret the sentiment of the why, no? And it turns out that the sentiment was more negative than the initial response, no? And then we analyze the sentiment. In the sentiment, you see that people begin to see, so they say yes, employment, no? Yes to jobs, income, but then they say, but I know that there are environmental impacts, negative, there is conflict. So people do see the trade-off, no? So they see that the natural resources bring good things, but also bad things, no? And they, therefore, what they want is a compensation of those trade-offs, no? And that's what they want. And interesting, we did this, we work with psychologists. Yes, it's weird that economists work with psychologists, but we work with psychologists, no? And we ask them to interpret, this metaphor analysis, no? About how people, that statement translate into a metaphor, no? And it's interesting that the mining is usually associated with journey or a system, no? But I want to discuss this journey. So the mining is in like a transition to something else, no? And the same happened with oil. So the narrative that is more associated with the extractive sector is this journey, no? And in oil also transformation, no? So clearly people are seeing these sectors as good to go somewhere else, no? And they know the trade-off. People are not, that they don't see, they see the trade-off, but what they see is this transformation, no? So, and then interestingly enough, we went also to see, and what kind of firms do you want to have? And the number one concern is environment. I want a firm that is environmentally responsible, no? And the second one, I want a firm that listen to me, no? It's very interesting, no? The third one is it's a little bit more trickier. I want a firm that, thanks to the firm, I can pay lower taxes, no? So those are the three first things that they say that they want. It's interesting, they don't want jobs, no? Or for example, they don't want a firm that have good relations with the government. They want is a firm that listens to me, that cares about the environment, but also that at the end I can pay lower taxes because that firm is there, no? So that shows you a little bit where we are. So that's our conclusion, is a little bit that, we are on a complex transition, but at the end, all politics is local, no? And if you don't solve the local issues, you may have problem of access to resources. And we have seen in many countries, no, mines close and things like that, no? And when we look at all politics that is local, the problem is that today we have a mismatch between the institutional settings and what people want, no? And therefore we have to rethink a little bit how that institutional setting works in order to then have less conflict and then eventually to have access to resources, no? And that not to miss another train, another opportunity of another resource booms that we are not going to take advantage of, no? So with that, I finish. I think I went on time.
Yeah. Oh, perfect.
Okay.
Perfect. Like
thank you.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much. Some very interesting and some not necessarily directly intuitive or expected insights, no? And I think that makes it especially interesting. And I think my first question would be, kind of, you've shown that on one side, people are feeling they're not getting their fair share, right? That was in the first kind of bar graphs that you were showing. And then on the other side, that there is a preference to distribute more or have a higher part of kind of the revenues towards producing regions. So how do you kind of combine, how do you make sense of those two facts at the same time?
With the last fact that I want to pay lower taxes, no?
Yeah.
So I think that at the end, the problem is people feel that they are not, that firms are not contributing enough, no? So my problem is not, I don't know, so I can be politically correct. Let me use a Venezuelan example. so the problem is not, between Zulia and Lara, no? My problem is with the oil company, no? And so that kind of is the circle, no? The issue there is then, it's not that companies do not, that's why we are now working on transparency, because it's not that the company does not pay, company pays tax, and honestly, if I have to redo this experiment again, I would like to ask the question, instead of paying lower taxes, if you have less health or less education, because at the end, it's a big question, is where people are realizing that the school or that the hospital is being paid by the royalties, no? And I think at the end, and we were discussing this before this meeting, no? People don't associate that school with the royalty or the that is paid by the companies, no? And unfortunately, we have invested a lot on transparency platforms, but really they are not friendly. So the people that goes to that platform really cannot tie the school. They just see a number that says that this government spend, no? So I think we need to begin rethink. And actually, we worked this with AITI. We did an experiment, and we realized that people never tie up their revenue. So we need to begin working, because so far, what people at the end, what they claim is that the companies are not paying taxes. No, so that's what closed those.
And then a follow-up in that connection, because what you also showed in kind of one of those results is that there was a relatively high trust in the government, right? But a distrust of the company. So I'd be interested in whether you think or have analyzed whether there's a difference in whether there's a state-owned enterprise, for example, that runs some of these operations, or whether that's a foreign company. Because oftentimes, at least in political discourse, that also is kind of something that different parties play on, right? Kind of this idea of the foreign companies that come to take our resources and then they're not paying their taxes. But so is that different if it's a state-owned enterprise?
Well, that's a very good question. That let me put it this way. You probably will need to expand this, no? Because if you look at the countries, all of them have state-owned companies, no? However, it's not the case of mining, and we see the same response of mining, no? So not necessarily state. So let me put it in oil and gas. All the 500 countries have state-owned companies, no? Even in Peru, which is very liberal, still have Petroperú, no? But in mining, there are no state. And even there, you see that difference. No, of course, in Bolivia, yes.
Bolivia and Chile as well.
Yeah.
No? So, and I mean, in Chile, you have some of these arrangements where it's joint enterprises, whereas in Argentina, it's completely private.
Yeah.
So it would be interesting to.
But my point is that you see the same level of answer even in Peru, that is all private, or in Ecuador is also all private, or in Colombia. No, so there is this there is this difference, no, between the thing, which is what we have to say is true, is that we also have asked people if they want national companies instead of, and there is a strong preference for national companies, no, in the region, no. So I think there is also this issue, maybe nationalism there, not necessarily a state control, but yes.
Yeah, we had in kind of some exchanges with the Chilean policymakers, for example. They were saying that they were seeing the presence of at least one big state-owned enterprise as legitimizing kind of a lot of other private enterprises being active in the sector, so that you can kind of combine the two to politically gather support. But then kind of another question that I had, you ended on the point on saying that there's kind of a mismatch currently within what we or what we see in a lot of kind of the institutional capacity, some of those areas versus what the needs are. And I was wondering whether you have, I mean, you touched upon kind of taxation distribution, environmental regulation, civic engagement and transparency. Would you think that kind of, is there one area where you see the biggest gap between what the current institutions kind of are set up to do and what kind of the demand is? Or would you say that that differs a lot depending on the country and the context?
I think that's a very good question. There is difference. Remember, in Latin America, we have only 3 real federations, right? There are Mexico, Argentina, and Brazil, no? But in theory, Venezuela is a federation, but not anymore. So I think there is a huge difference between those and then other countries like Colombia, Chile, that are actually central governments that have begun to decentralize function, but they're not federations, no? So therefore, I think that then those difference then make difference, no? Because, for example, environmental regulation at the end, in federations, there is more responsibility of local governments, while in other countries there is less, no? It's more like a central responsibility, but distribution is more local, no? So that in those countries is where you see probably the need to rethink how you distribute the revenue, because at the end, the environmental regulation is national, while maybe in federations, the debate is different, because the issue there is more, are local governments responding to the needs,
And another point in that aspect, which maybe touches upon kind of the different local aspects too, is that a lot of the two metaphors that you picked up, or one specifically, was this aspect of the journey, right? And so I'm wondering whether you see a tension or a discussion there as well. A, where is that journey leading to? And B, what's the different regional impact as well? Because maybe that journey is a journey for the country as a whole, but it may not happen in those local regions that are seeing the current impact, right?
No, and that's a very good question, because at the end, the question is not at each individual. So, and I think it's at the local level, and a different debate that we're also looking at it, is that there are many regions in Latin America that produce oil or coal, and the big question today, and believe me, because we have met with these people, is what will happen here the day that they close the coal mine or they close the oil field, and that's a local issue, That's why the phrase there is the extractive transition, that I have to give credit to the author of the phrase. We were having a discussion once with Tomás González, who was Energy Ministry of Colombia, about this, and he said, I never realized, but in Latin America, what will happen is you will have an extractive transition. You will be from hydrocarbons to mining, and the problem there is that it will have very, so maybe, I don't know, take the case of a country, maybe Bolivia. I know that it's in a crisis, or maybe Peru, that has gas, and then have mining, and say, no, as a country, I'm fine, my external accounts are going to be fine, and switching from one commodity to the other. But it has huge geographical implications inside the country. So therefore, the journey is at the local level,
And kind of another part of the journey that I know kind of you've touched upon in other publications that I'd be curious to get your thoughts on, is this whole discussion about the different linkages, right? And the linkages in the supply chain, whether you have upstream or downstream linkages, and kind of how policies may impact that. So I'd be curious to get your thoughts on where you see opportunities and potentially challenges in that context.
Sure. No, so we are actually beginning to work more on those linkages. We were seeing data, for example, from the VAT, or data from Social Security, and interestingly enough, we have found that sectors linked to the extractive sector, either through sales or through labor, tend to have higher productivity. So clearly, you can leverage these sectors to leverage productivity and generate sectors with high productivity. The big question here is, we always have this dream about the downstream, and we forget about the upstream. And there are huge opportunities on the upstream that sometimes are missed. So I think that it's a good time to have this debate, especially given this transition. But I think, the dream of having the battery, that is kind of the dream of every country. Maybe we can think about why don't you produce, the machinery that is used in the mine, the electrical panels that you need in the mine, or things like that, Because I think sometimes the debate has been a lot of on the downstream, and I think we are missing the potential on the upstream, but the bottom line is that sectors linked to these activities have high productivity, so we have. I think this is an opportunity to leverage those sectors,
And even in the upstream, though, I'm wondering, because some of the upstream activities, so there's a lot of investment that goes, especially in the exploration phase, right? Both in mining and oil and gas, and those are highly specialized and kind of technical activities. Where if you talk to people from the industry, they would say, okay, you know, if we spend $100 million on exploration, 70 or 80% of that is going to be imported because there are no local suppliers. But kind of how feasible do you think it is kind of to really step into that that part of the supply chain? Or is it not just a question of, okay, these are kind of economics of scale, and there's 5, 6 very large international companies that are specialized in this, and maybe there's a niche, but it's because it's challenging as well, right, to get into that part.
Well, and that's a very good question, because that's another agenda that we're pushing, is if you begin to think about the value chain not as a country but as a region,
Yeah.
the opportunities change, because then you begin to have the economies of scale, no? So maybe, yes, if you think about, and we have worked a lot with this country, you know, about Colombia and the possibilities of processing copper. Well, I mean, if it's only Colombia, maybe not. But if we think about the regional value chain, yes, no? So I think that the key issue is to get precisely the economies of scale is to begin to see. I think that what we have to realize is, because, especially thinking about the upstream, no? Is that because we have this huge mining sector, there is a huge opportunity, and we have beginning to see even interesting things in the region. No? Think a little bit about Arequipa. Has almost tripled the size of the city over the last, 15 or 20 years, and part of it is because it has becoming a hub for mining services. No, because I mean it's close to the mines. No, a lot of mining operations. So many firms have decided it's better to be in Arequipa than in Lima. No, so my point is that you can develop some hubs, especially thinking that you have this huge mining sector that is demanding things. And if we think about how to generate value change, and thinking not only about a country but at the region, we might be able to develop certain.
And are there specific policy levers that kind of you've seen that have been effective in that context, or so does that require specific state intervention, or you think, okay, if that opportunity emerges and there is an entrepreneurial spirit, it will develop by itself?
No, of course, there are a lot of policy levers. No, one, of course, is infrastructure. So the region, still infrastructure is a huge challenge in the region. No? So we need to think about the infrastructure. Second is also still trade restriction. It's amazing. We still, it's not easy to move something from Ecuador to Colombia, from Ecuador, even though they are part of the same, in theory, trade group, the Andean community. It's really hard to move things. So there is still a lot of regulation. And of course, I think a key issue still, believing that, especially thinking about startup, is finance. No, so we really, so there are many. The good thing is that there are some huge, even mining companies that are willing to be like the channel for credit, not to go to suppliers and things like that, no. But clearly, we still have issues about financing.
With that, I think I would open it up to questions and Q&A here from the audience. I think we'll have. I don't know whether we need a mic, but please briefly introduce yourself and. Yeah, to have it on Zoom. So Chuck will pass around the mic, and yeah, so if you can briefly introduce yourself and then state your question.
Hi, thank you so much for the presentation. My name is Jonas Schrock. I'm a Master's of Public Policy student here. Just a couple of quick questions on the public opinion research. So on questions like redistribution and whether people are getting a fair share, do you find those answers to be relatively consistent between mining districts and non-mining districts? And if not, what are the main differences? And then also, I think you might have had a graph about it that I missed. But when you say that there's kind of a social license for mining in oil and gas because more than 50% of people generally say that it's good for the country, are we talking like close to 50%, or is it closer like 70, 80%? And does that vary a lot by country? Thank you very much.
So, quick answer and good question. It varies a country, no? So there are countries that is 52%, and there are countries that are 75%. No? But in general, all the countries are on that side, no, on the positive side. And then on the first question, that's a very good question, because the sample was not representative to go to mining district. We couldn't do, but there is a huge difference between urban and rural. There is more support for mining in rural than in urban, which shows a little bit this, if you wish, contrast between, let me put it this way, this let me see, how can I say that politically correct? No, but this kind of, if you wish, educated elite in the cities that may have some concerns vis-a-vis the people that are the beneficiaries, no, at the end of the sectors, no? And let's go even further. If you remember the referendum in Ecuador to close the oil field, nationally, it was against, but the region where the oil field is vote in favor of the keeping the oil field operation. And the same when you see the example of Panama, the local community, which by the way is a original community in the Bugle, were clearly in favor of the mine company. No, so indeed you see this difference, no, between those constituents. No,
that's where it interacts as well with kind of the design of the revenue system, right? And how you distribute.
Yeah.
Because if you have it very localized, then maybe it's kind of just the support from the local community.
Mhm.
So that might be a counter argument in that sense. And okay, if you spread the benefits wider, you generate kind of a bigger coalition for
Yeah.
support.
Mhm. Well, okay, I have an anecdote for that, but let's say, well, let me go quickly. No, I did a
We have time. We have time.
Okay. I did a chapter in a book about decentralization, no?
Mhm.
And I interview a lot of Venezuelan actors, no? So let me tell you, Venezuela, the redistribution is plain simple, no? It was until we approved a special law that gave oil producing districts like a little bit higher share, no? In Venezuela, there was no redistribution, there was no local benefits.
Mhm.
So everything go to the state, to the government treasury,
Equally.
and equally distributed.
Mhm.
No? But then we approved a law, no, to give oil-producing districts a little bit, oil-producing states a little bit more revenue, no? La ley de asignaciones especiales venezuelanas, that he remember that episode. So I was talking with the political actors, no? And I talk especially with people from Zulia state, which is a state that produces more, and they say that, no. So in the law at the end, it was included that countries that have pipelines, refineries, and things like that can benefit. And the whole idea was to increase the constituency of states that support the change in Congress of the law. So I maybe there is I agree with you that maybe the argument about that could be
broadening it.
Mhm.
And I think this was kind of what you alluded to earlier, kind of
Mhm.
the support.
Yeah.
Very positive, somewhat positive.
Mhm. Okay. Mhm.
Thank you so much. I'm Nicholas, an MPA and international development student here. When you're providing context, you mentioned that a lot of the revenue structures, taxation structures, are quite complex, right, based on very different royalty schemes, et cetera. I'm wondering if you think that a simplicity or like simplifying of these revenue structures and taxation structures would help ease some of the concerns that you've seen that people feel they're not getting their fair share. Where I think there's kind of a question of, okay, maybe you don't fully understand how much tax is really being collected effectively. But on the other hand, there is quite high government trust that they're doing the right thing. And so maybe you would think, well, I don't fully understand the system, but the government seems to be at least collecting what they've declared they have.
Well, I mean, that's a great question. Because, I mean, so sometimes the problem of we economists is that we say simple solutions that are not simple. No? So of course, the simple solution is that you really do a pure for-profit tax, right, of the oil sector, and with that pure for-profit. So what we in economics call really economic benefit, no, and that you resist it. The problem is that you have a lot of legacies from the past in your tax system, and sometimes get rid of those legacies is really hard. So I'm going to give you an example. So many of our countries pay royalties. Royalties are a legacy, no? That kind of was the payment that you needed to because you're exploiting. And in some countries, these royalties today is the closest things to a for-profit tax that you can ever imagine. But they could not change the name royalty because they realized that the political economy of changing that, because in the national sentiment, if you wish, royalty was something that belongs to the people, no? So there are a lot of legacies sometimes that our tax systems have that makes harder not to have like a more simple tax structure, no, as we should. But then you have these reforms, and the example that we use in the paper that I mentioned about Peru, that's precisely so. So the government of Peru, in the windfall, they realized that their tax system did not really capture well the windfall, no? So then they create a special windfall tax that is called the Impuesto Especial a la Minería, and gravamen especial minería. So it's the same. It depends on the contract that you were charged at, no? But it turns out that that tax system too, because you want efficiency, you don't want to distort more the system, is deductible from the income tax, no? So you create this system that is going to make your tax system even better, collect more rents. But the moment that you put it that it was deducted from the income tax, it turns out that from the income tax is how you estimate the canon that is transferred to the local governments. And then the local governments lose money in that reform, no? So that's sometimes the problem that you have with these systems, that eventually, they have different incentives, no?
Question in the back.
Yeah, my name is Vadini and I'm a mid-career MP student. My question is that, are there some international standards for corporate social responsibility percentage in the profit of the firms? As in some of the countries, we have observed that this amount is never defined. And even if it's given to the political elites or to the tribal elders, due to which it creates alienation in the local community. Thank you.
That's a very good question, no? So in general, there are, I think, more and more standards of corporate social responsibility, no? And for example, you have the EATI, is for transparency. So if you subscribe to the ATI, you have to account the whole value chain of the dollar, no, up to the final beneficiary, no. So that's an example. So therefore, you know who is the final beneficiary of each dollar, no. Then there are other standards that if you adhere to those, then you can. For example, some stock exchange requires certain standard of social. So if you are listed, for example, in Toronto, you have to fulfill certain corporate responsibility, no? But they are not necessarily required in all countries, so therefore that you have there a problem, no? So that's a challenge, no? And I think that, when you talk with the mines, and I'm talking here of the mines that in general have good policy, no? They are beginning to get concerned that, all the burden is on them and there are no local governments, no? So I think that, yes, we need to require social standards. Yes, we want to have good players, no? And actually, I was doing a paper with a colleague, Graham Davis from Colorado School of Mines. We never finished, and we should, I think, that we found that sometimes that, countries that do not have their good regulatory framework get bad actors. So you get companies without social standards and things like that. But at the end, even if you get the good companies, some of the companies are beginning to say, look, but we need states, we need governments. We cannot do everything by yourself, no? So I think that at the end, one key issue is developing local capacities, because without them, even the mining company would say, look, everything is falling on us, no?
Yeah, just an additional note on that. That's also something kind of that we heard in our Bolivia project, where there's a lack of kind of regulation, and there are not enough kind of rules as to how companies would engage with local communities. And so in that sense, the companies are saying it falls on them kind of to enter into negotiations with the local communities, which is then kind of, there's no clear approach to this. And then you might end up having kind of the bad actors that are comfortable kind of in those areas, but maybe not those that would prefer clear, transparent rules, and maybe even a state organization that kind of helps in that context, right? With that, I'll shift to some questions that we have from our online audience. So Francisco Monaldi from Baker Institute at Rice University, I think.
You know him.
I think so too. So I think he has more of a comment than a question, but he says, as you know, in Colombia, initially the royalties were distributed to resource-producing regions. Then Minister Echeverry changed to redistribute to other regions because resource producers were wasting the money and receiving too much revenues per capita. Then it had to be reversed. So it seems nothing works.
Yeah. At the end, I think an issue. So for example, we are finishing a paper. This is one of my colleagues, no, that is looking at Peru, no. And his finding is that local governments are shifting towards more like small projects that are less than $1 million, no, that they can execute and finish, no. Which I think the big issue is, again, how to build capacity, no? Because clearly, maybe to have huge projects, they don't have the capacity to do it, no? And therefore, they prefer to do small projects, no? That they know they will finish, no? And especially nothing better for a mayor that show himself, cutting the ribbon. So the issue of capacities is I think it's going to be, and believe me, even, or let me put it this way, we have some little capacity that even governments are beginning to think about projects. So in Peru, in this government, but in the 2 years ago, they launched this program called Punche, no? Which the whole point was to send people to the local governments to spend, no? Because they were not spending, no? So I think that the governments have the money, but then we need to build capacity for them, no? My concern, and this is another paper we are doing together in Chile, is that there is this firm that decide to give money directly to the communities, no? Remember that in Chile, there was no redistribution to local governments up to just like 1 or 2 years ago. So there was this mining company that said, you know what, I'm going to give 3% voluntarily, 3% to the local community, no? And interestingly enough, we are finding still temporary, so I don't promise, but no, I think the results are very good that we have so far. We have found improvement in education and things like that, no? So my concern is that we begin to think, that let's skip the government and let's go directly to people. So I think that's a problem.
Then, well, one question over here. 10 more. Mike? Mike is coming.
Oh, I have a super basic question. What is an extractive industry?
Oh, a very good question.
What type of especially in agriculture, what type of agriculture should be considered extractive versus not? You had rubber, for example, on there. I don't know if that's considered agriculture, but should soybean, for example, be considered an extractive industry or
No.
vegetable farming?
So, great question, because I don't like the name extractive either, but that's how people call it. so in general, extractive are non-renewable resources, no? But then there is a huge question whether sectors like plantation could be considered extractive or not, no? But theoretically, it's just non-renewable resources. The issue that I put some example of rubber is that is in general that Latin America has a bad experience with commodities, no? That you have this commodity, this is a big thing, and then eventually it's no longer the big thing, and then you got nothing of having the big thing in that. So we had rubber, we have guano in the past, and then after they become a huge commodity, and that's, for example, the example that we now, the question that people that produce coal and oil is asking in the region, no? What will be of my community the day they close the coal mine and things like that, no? Mm-hmm.
Any other question here in the audience? Otherwise,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thanks for the talk. I'm Clement with Growth Lab. My question is about opposition. You shared a lot about people's preferences in general, but people who are strongly opposed to certain projects are especially important, because it's not that you lose the election, it's that you may escalate to a level of conflict that's very damaging to the region or the country. Did you see anything in the data that told you about the preferences of these people in particular, people who have a very negative view of extractive industries?
That's how to say in the movie, it's coming to a theater near you soon. So we are now putting together all the data of all the different projects to try to begin to have an idea of constituencies, no? Using recommendations. So using machine learning, we're putting together all the data, because the whole idea is to identify which are the different constituencies, no, that have different preferences. Because I think it's important, as you say, to understand who is for, who is against, why, and But yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there was actually one online question that went into kind of the same direction, where Gabila was asking whether there was any attempt to distinguish between producing and non-producing regions. So whether you split some of those results that you had in the surveys between those regions. But I understand that maybe that is part.
Yeah, that's part. But I think there was a similar question here that we do find it's a bit different between urban and rural, no? Because at the country level, but maybe at the regional level, now that you see, at the country level, I cannot, I mean, it's not representative to producing or producing, but at the regional level, we can do that. Yes.
More questions here in the audience? Ricardo? Let's go in here. On your left.
Ricardo.
Go.
You mentioned about upstream. Now, hopefully you want an industry that can scale. Now, downstream industry can sell to the whole world. Do you imagine an upstream industry that is born because it supplies the local industry, but that eventually can sell to the world? What ideas do you have on the upstream side?
No, that's a very good question, because that's precisely the issue that right now we have such a huge mine. I mean, so it's not that we have a single mine. No? In the region, we have a huge concentration now of mines. No, so to give you an idea, in Peru, last time I count, like 200 mines open. No? So you have a huge mine. That's precisely the scale. No, we have the opportunity to have a huge sector. No. That then can help you develop a sector that eventually sells to the world. Yes. But for that we have to think about a regional market, not a local market, because then that's the issue. No, and I'm not going to say the name of the mine, because I don't know if I am authorized by them to say it. But I was talking with a mine, no, and they said, look, I have here like 5 suppliers, no, that they start like mom-pop operations in the garage, no. Now these are firms that have 60 employees, no. But clearly the next step is not with me. It has to think about the regional market, no? So that those are the jumps that we need, but then we have to think about regional. It cannot be the mine that is next to me. You have to think about the region. But the region has the scale. That's my point, no?
Bula Sparres with the Growth Lab. I had a question. Have you interacted or thought about this line of work in thinking with selectorate theory? Bruce Bueno de Mesquita has these ideas more about kind of autocracies and democracies and the size of the winning coalition to kind of elect leaders. I wonder here, I mean, yes, this is what the entire population thinks, or the population of certain subsectors, what do they think? It would, in different countries, would kind of the size of the people that actually enforce this vary? And maybe there's a reason why there's a gap between what people want and what gets done, is because one thing is we're talking about preferences, and the other is we're talking about the size of who gets to decide what happens. But I don't know if you've explored this or have any ideas to do so.
The easy answer is that, you know, we are the ADB, we don't do politics. But I think that's a very good question. No? I mean, again, what are the coalitions? No, it's I think the huge issue. No, it's this, as I mentioned, this issue in Venezuela. No, when they say no, we need a coalition. No, so probably this is something that we need to think about. No, I mean, at the end, maybe it's just a coincidence, no? But Pedro Castillo came from a mining region, no? So my point is that, I mean, we have to think a little bit, no, that how we begin to take into account this difference, no?
Kind of along the same line, I was wondering, thinking about coalitions in different groups, whether you have analyzed kind of the different trends or implications of native and indigenous communities, because that, of course, can play an additional role into land use and different regulations as well, and political perceptions.
Well, I mean, surprisingly enough, well, maybe not surprising. So again, let me put the example. In Panama, the people in support of the mine were native. No? So it was an original original inhabitants of the area. No? So when we see perception, there is not much variation because we have any origin between any origin. No? So I think that in general, but there is the key issue that is non-trivial is that how you do property rights, because in some countries property rights of native areas are different than property rights in the rest of the country. So that issue is really important, no? And I know that these are not native population, but it was really interesting. I in a point of my life, I worked with Belize, no? There was oil. And Belize is common law. In theory, in common law, the owner of the land is the owner of the resource. But remember that the British government nationalized oil in a point of time, no? And Belize got independence after that, no? So there was this oil. Of course, this was not native population, were Mennonites, no? And there was this huge debate between the Mennonites and the government who owns the resource, because they say, no, this is common law. And the argument of the government is, no, our independence was after nationalization, so it's ours, no? So this issue about land rights is very important with native populations.
We don't have any further question. Otherwise, you can have concluding remarks if there are any final thoughts that you would want to share.
Well, I mean, I want to share. So first, thank you for the invitation. I mean, this is, as some of you may know, I actually had the opportunity to be a visiting fellow sometimes, so it's like coming back home. So great to be here. But I think, for one side, I know I started the presentation here, but I want to clarify this. So I think we know a lot about the macro. We know a lot about the tax systems. No, here Jose Ignacio here knows about tax systems. We know a lot about property rights and things like that. No. So I'm not saying that we should forget about it, no, because there's still issues about it. But I think that we have forgotten the local issues, no. And at the end, I think we're going to a world where all politics is local, as I said that, no. And therefore, if we want to access those resources, we need to think about the local also, no? Because as you say, in the region, there are many mines that today are closed because conflict at the local level. So you may have the resource, but you don't have the access to the resource, no? So I think that it's important that we also, and there we have less research. Compared to the other issues. So I think that we should begin to understand better the dynamics of the local, because it's going to be important eventually if we want to take advantage of this new wave that is, if you will, benefiting the region.
So we'll have you back in a couple months with your second round of insights from the next analysis.
Thank you.
Well, join me in thanking Osmel again for a great presentation.
Thank you.
Había una pregunta online.